Hello, it's been a while, and this topic is something that I've always had interest in, and I've also recently responded and commented on other people's YouTube channels regarding this very topic. And it enabled me to put the story all together to where it was more understandable, and it's important because the truth is important. This topic is about, are the two witnesses mentioned in Revelations the literal Moses and Elijah, or are they two different messengers? Even in my church, the pastors don't agree. And like I said, it's important because what it does is it creates a culture within the church, and we'll talk about that towards the end of this video. So we will look at the claims and quotes that suggest this and compare them to the Bible scriptures. We will not base our understanding of scripture on quotes of a group or a man, but only the truths in the Bible. Sure, if a quote echoes or reflects what's in the Bible, we can accept it as truth. But if the scripture has to be twisted or taken out of context to agree with the quote, it should be rejected. Now, do these quotes sound familiar to you? First, Moses and Elijah are kept alive for future service because they served so well. Second, Moses didn't really die. Third, Moses was resurrected. Fourth, both Elijah and Moses must die because of the curse of sin and death. 5, Elijah and Moses were seen on Mount Transfiguration, proving they are alive. 6, Moses and Elijah are brought back because they know how to perform the miracles. These are all quotes that I pulled from tapes, and these are the proofs used when someone speaks of the two witnesses being Elijah and Moses. Notice none of these are Bible quotes, but are comments made by religious authorities or ministers in the church. They are men's comments and often become dictates or dogmas. Let's address each quote and compare it to the Bible. Now, the first one that we want to look at is in Revelations, where the miracles of the two witnesses identify them, or supposedly identify them, as Moses and Elijah. This is the most often used scripture to prove the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah. So let's discuss this first. Revelations 11:6. It says, "These two have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will." Well, what these quotes are trying to do to prove that it's Moses and Elijah are trying to take those two miracles, shutting the heavens, stopping the rain, and turning the water to blood. They're trying to say that those are Moses and Elijah's miracles, and that identifies who's going to be doing them. Now, God has performed many miracles in the past using his prophets, and none of the miracles were dependent on the man. Notice, there is no mention of the names of any prophets, only the mighty power of God and his miracles. If he were declaring a return of Moses and Elijah, wouldn't he name them and how they would arrive? But he doesn't, because those two witnesses haven't been identified or named. A good example is John the Baptist wasn't identified, but was the voice of one crying in the wilderness, and then later confirmed as Elijah by Jesus Christ. In this verse, God is declaring that he will show mighty miracles during the sounding of the two witnesses. He is not identifying who the witnesses are. Next, Moses and Elijah are kept alive for future service. Moses and Elijah are brought back because they know how to perform the miracles. Really? Really? Has any man performed miracles? No. It's God that performs the miracles. These two men were dependent on God, not vice versa. God can raise up stones to worship him or to be a messenger. Moses and Elijah served their purpose for God and are not needed to return because they have some knowledge or experience. God is sovereign and doesn't need a specific person to accomplish his will. Next, both Elijah and Moses must die because of the curse of sin and death. When God judges a person and grants them life without death, they don't need to return and die. An example is the raptured living saints. They will not have to return and die on a future day. They have been judged by God as worthy, spotless, dressed in white. Deuteronomy 34:5. So Moses, the servant of God, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knows of his sepulchre unto this day. So, will Moses have to die a second time? Not once, but twice? Nonsense. Moses didn't really die or was resurrected. Here we go again. Joshua 1:1. Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, came to pass that the Lord spoke unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I will give to them, even to the children of Israel. Now, to say that Moses isn't dead and was resurrected or kept alive is false or a lie. Also, God makes this statement to Joshua after Moses' burial, after the 30 days of mourning, and when Joshua is commissioned to take over. Currently, Moses had been buried for weeks or months. A resurrection of an earthly body is only to allow that person to live again on this earth. Moses was resurrected. Some use this verse to persuade those to believe Moses' body was resurrected. Jude 1:9. Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke thee. Notice that God said Moses was buried and no man knew of the location. And Satan is asking Michael where the body is. This verse does not imply that the body is missing because he was resurrected, but Jude is using this verse and others to persuade Christians to keep the faith and not be led astray by evil spirits, because those that are led astray are judged by God. Lastly, every time God raised a body, it was mentioned in the Bible and not hidden in types or shadows. Elijah and Moses were seen on Mount Transfiguration. Luke 9:28, and it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings, he took Peter and John, James, and went up into the mountain to pray. And as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistening. And behold, there talked with him 2 men, which were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. But Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake, they saw his glory, and the 2 men that stood with him. And it came to pass, as they departed from him, Peter said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. While he thus spake, there came a cloud and overshadowed them, and they feared as they entered into the cloud. And there came a voice out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. Matthew and Mark also wrote of this event, but Luke's report has the most detail. First, Jesus was praying alone while the others slept. Second, while Jesus was praying, there was a supernatural break between dimensions, heaven and earth. Jesus' countenance and appearance changed within this dimension, glistening and glowing like Moses' face when he was by the pillar of fire. Third, Moses and Elijah were now able to meet Jesus and speak to him. Notice that Peter and the others awoke but did not enter the gate or dimension that Jesus, Moses, and Elijah were in. They didn't hear the conversation. Fourth, once Moses and Elijah left Jesus and the heavenly gate closed, now Peter was able to speak to Jesus. Lastly, Jesus, Moses, and Elijah were in a gateway between dimensions, allowing those two heavenly bodies to speak to Jesus. It wasn't a resurrected Moses or an earthly Elijah. They were glorified heavenly bodies that couldn't step into this world. Both Elijah and Moses must die because of the curse of sin and death. First, Moses absolutely died and was buried. His body was hidden by the angels. So does he have to die again, even though he died and was buried? No. Elijah was judged worthy to bypass death and be taken up by God, avoiding the curse of sin and death, and has no obligation to return to die as a witness. Let's look at the definition of dictate and decree. A religious dictate is an authoritative command, decree, or rule believed to stem from a divine source or religious authority, guiding the moral, social, and spiritual conduct of believers. These directives often establish absolute obligations, such as laws, doctrines, or behavioral prohibitions, intended to enforce conformity with a religious tradition or core tenets. So why is this seemingly benign narrative important? Why does it matter what is the truth? It's because it creates two separate cultures in the church. One culture that seeks truth and reasons doctrine with the words in the Bible, while the other culture bases their truth on man-made dictates, creeds, and dogma spoken by their leadership or religious authority. One culture fosters a relationship with Jesus, and the other leans on man. Why would I make such a bold claim? Because we know that Satan is constantly working to corrupt the truth in our relationship with Jesus by organizational dictates. Our goal isn't to be right, but to know the truth through fellowship with Jesus Christ and not blindly following a man, messenger, or church. Jesus is the arbiter of truth and our guide to the first resurrection.